All right, fifth grade, happy Tuesday. So yesterday we talked about the First Continental Congress, why that was so important, what they did, why they met, and really what it was they had to decide, as all the colonies together, what are they going to do about the king? He's being crazy, he's doing terrible things, making bad decisions. So then we talked about how their plan now, after that First Continental Congress, was if the king stops with all of his crazy, terrible decisions, then they would be good. Then their meeting did what it was supposed to do. And then they said, if he does not stop, then we have to meet again and talk about war. And that is what the Second Continental Congress was. All right. So the king did not stop his nonsense. Okay. So down here on slide number 3, first thing we are going to do is look up a picture. Second Continental Congress. All right, so some of these are kind of the exact same picture as the First Continental Congress. Some of them, they just use it and they say just Continental Congress. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and grab, let's see, I'm going to pick one that I did not pick yesterday. I'm going to pick this one here. It's in black and white. You can pick any picture that you'd like. Place it here. It's kind of small. It's all right. All right, so now, why did they meet? We talked about why it was so important that they met. It's right in the middle. There we go. Okay, so the reason why they met, if you remember, they met because the king didn't stop with his, we're going to just say, foolishness. Okay, now we know what that means, right? We know that what that means is that he did not stop giving them bad taxes, all these bad decisions that he was making. That's what we think of when we think of foolishness. Okay. All right, so then I'm actually going to put another picture here as well. King George III, if you remember what he looks like. This gentleman here. We looked up a couple pictures of him earlier. I'm going to find that picture from Hamilton. I think he does a good job of kind of explaining just with pictures how crazy he looks. So I'm going to copy this image here. Hamilton and the original too. King did not stop with his foolishness. And there is the king right there. Okay. If you need to pause for a second, you can go ahead and do that. I'm going to move on here though. Slide number 5. What did they accomplish in this meeting? Right. So they met. It was most of the same people. But they had to just, they had to do some things in this meeting, right? So the first thing that they did created an army. This army was called the Continental Army. They we'll talk more about them. There was also a lot of people that were volunteers, right? We talked about how they were militia back in the 7 Years' War. Those same militia people join this army as well. Another reason, another thing that they accomplished, they made a war strategy. They made kind of an idea of how they're going to fight this war, right? Just going out there and giving people guns and say, go ahead, go win, that's not enough, right? They have to make a strategy. What are they going to do? Are they going to fight in these places, or are they going to stay away from these places? Are they going to, they had to make a strategy for how they were going to fight. Okay. The next thing that they did was they had to create some leaders of the colonies. Okay. If you remember, their leader right now is the king. They don't want him anymore, so they have to make their own leaders now, right? We will talk more about how this kind of starts, kind of almost an effect of what's going to happen is these leaders that they choose, they're going to start becoming the leaders of a new country. All right, now we will talk about that a little bit more later this week and next week, but in the Second Continental Congress, they had to create some leaders for themselves. And then last, they wrote some petitions to the king, saying, you decided that you don't want to help. They actually made a declaration that said, we are now at the point where we have grabbed our guns. Whatever you want to do is up to you, but you are not listening to us, and we have grabbed our guns. That's one of the petitions that they wrote, actually. And so they're ready to go. They're ready for a war. Okay, so we will start talking about that war tomorrow, the first war we'll talk about tomorrow. But a couple more slides here. There is a new notable person at the Second Continental Congress. And we talked about how notable it's important to remember, and that person is Ben Franklin. Okay, so you probably heard of Ben Franklin before. Ben Franklin is the gentleman who was on the $100 bill. Okay, he was actually just about everything. So we're going to write a lot of stuff here. Writer, philosopher. Okay, and a philosopher is somebody who tries to figure out how life works. Yeah. He was a politician. He was a postmaster. So he actually was a postmaster, somebody who works with the mail. So that's kind of an interesting thing. He was a scientist. He was an inventor. He invented a lot of things. And last, he was an activist. Okay, so he was somebody who really believed in the colonist fight. He did not like the king. He believed that had to make some change. Okay, so Ben Franklin did a lot of things. Now, you'll notice I never said president. He was never president. Okay, a lot of people think that Ben Franklin was the president. He was a president sometime. He was not. He never became president. He was actually pretty old by the time that the Second Continental Congress happened. And so he was not even alive, really, when it was time for his turn to be chosen as president. All right. Okay, so one thing about Ben Franklin that people maybe have heard of. So he flew a kite during a thunderstorm. He collected the charge from the thunder into a jar, and he proved that lightning was electricity. All right, so he invented something called the lightning rod, which you'll probably see lightning rods on top of buildings, in like tall buildings that are close to the sky. That was Ben Franklin. He invented that back in 1752. It's pretty cool. That was actually about 20 years before the time that we're talking about. But anyway, Ben Franklin, let's grab a picture here. I'm going to grab this one. It's kind of cool. So he did a lot of things. He helped out in a lot of different ways. He also had a lot of money because of all the things that he had done. And so he was able to help out in whatever way he could. Yep. So Ben Franklin. All right. Now, if you need to pause, go ahead. I'm going to move down here to the last slide. So now what? Right. So first, the colonists need to organize their army. Oops. Not organize their army. And then last, then they need to fight. That's all that's left. This is all that's left. Their fight. The war is all that's left. If they win, they get to be their own new country away from the king, make their own decisions. If they lose, they'll stay under a very mean and bossy king. All right, so this is what's left. Organize their army, and they need to fight. Okay, now tomorrow what we're going to do is talk about the very first fight of the American Revolution. Oh, just kidding. We're not going to talk about that. I got a little bit ahead of myself. We'll do that on Thursday. Tomorrow what we'll talk about is the different sides, how many people there were, how many soldiers there were on each side, and we'll see just how hard the colonists were going to have to fight. Okay, it's going to be a very challenging war. Okay, we'll talk about that tomorrow. If you have any questions, ask Miss V or myself.